Hello, everybody, and welcome to Right Here, Right Now, live Buffalo football talk. The second time today, we're joined by Sal Capaccio earlier. Now we're going to be joined by WGR's Nate Geary. Was going to do this as a pre-recorded conversation, but some news coming down today, a lot of conversation surrounding the Bills, so figured we might as well go live with this one. And as always, this presented by Forefathers Organics, and I'm your host, Alex Brasky, here for the Batavia Daily and Livingston County News. Each week, we'll discuss Buffalo's favorite football team, along with all the comings and goings from Orchard Park. And as always, this episode brought to you by our friends at Forefathers Organics.
Unlock the power of nature with Forefathers Organics, your premium CBD store. We offer the highest quality CBD and hemp products to liberate your mind, body, and soul, helping you live happy and free. Our mission is driven by excellence and transparency, using cutting-edge scientific methods to combat stress and target issues at their source. From potent ingestible CBD to soothing topicals, all our products are USDA certified organic. Discover all natural wellness from farm to table. Visit forefathersorganics.com for more information.
All right, before we get to our guest, Nate Geary, Sam Martin released by the Bills today, the punter for the last 3 seasons, I believe, in Buffalo. His release will save the team around $2 million for the time being, but they will obviously need a punter this season, and if they get one at the league minimum, it would result in about a $1 million cap saving. Jake Camarda is the only punter on the Bills roster at the current time. They signed him to a reserves future deal during the offseason. In my view, this is a player that's going to compete for a job, likely with a veteran punter that they'll bring in for training camp, perhaps 2 veteran punters that they bring in for training camp. Camarda's last full season in Tampa Bay, 41.2 net yards per punt. Only 33.8% of those punts landed inside the 20. Sam Martin last year, 39.8 net yards per punt, 46.3% of his punts fell inside the 20. There's also the component of Sam Martin holding for Tyler Bass. Martin, widely regarded as one of the top holders in the NFL. So for whatever that's worth, the Bills will be losing his services in that regard. But Tyler Bass seemed to figure things out. Whether or not that was due to Sam Martin's holding remains to be seen. But he finished 13 of 13 in the playoffs, did Bass, 250-plus yarders, 1 in Buffalo, 1 in Kansas City. So I'm not sure there's as much to worry about there as perhaps there was entering last season. But we welcome in our guest, Nate Geary, here on the show to discuss Sam Martin and more, as there's plenty to talk about. DK Metcalf, James Cook, and a lot of news surrounding the Bills this week. Nate, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing all right, Alex. I'm doing all right. Listen, I just poured one out for Sam Martin, so maybe he comes back though. I get the sense that when the dust settles, that maybe they reassess over the next couple of weeks as the rest of the roster and the salary cap comes into focus. But pour one out for Mr. Martin.
Your prebiotic soda that you got going on there.
But, I wish they were sponsoring me. It is delicious though.
I hear that that's really taking the world by storm, those poppies. I hear that they're putting up vending machines and they're selling out like literal hotcakes.
Quite good.
I have to get my hands on some of them. Usually for the prebiotics, I go with the yogurt, the Wegmans super yogurt. Tastes like one of the worst things I've ever tasted, but hey, the results speak for themselves, or in some circumstances smell for themselves. But why don't we talk about Sam Martin? Your thoughts on the news, but besides that, what do you think it means for Tyler Bass? Do you think Jake Camarda is a no-brainer as the plug and play here? You already mentioned maybe Sam Martin comes back. A lot of people acting like Jake Camarda is just going to walk right in and become the starting punter. I'm not sure I see it that way. Probably more of a competition. Is that the way that you see it? And then the impact on Tyler Bass.
Yeah, I'll start with the Tyler Bass implication. Listen, I think he finished the season really strong for where I think a lot of us were mid-season on Tyler Bass. He really kind of came back to and regained the form that made him one of the most accurate, kickers in the league. And I think a lot of that has to do with the comfortability level that he had with Sam Martin. So we'll see, kind of if there's a market for Sam Martin, maybe, he gets picked up right away, and that's that. But in terms of Camarda, the guy they've got on the roster right now, former 4th-round pick, I think in 2022 at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So this is a guy that was worthy of a draft pick, and frankly, it's a day 3 draft pick, but a draft pick nonetheless. And typically, those guys that get drafted in the league, for whether it's kickers or punters specialists, it means you're, one of the better players coming out that season. So, listen, this is not a team that punts a whole lot. They're certainly, I don't think, kind of looking on the roster saying to themselves, like, we need a guy that can really help us flip field position. The Bills are one of the most aggressive teams in the league on 4th down. So what they're really looking for is a guy that in limited time can come in, directionally kick, get the punt, to stop at the 1-yard line, to go out of bounds at the 5. So one of those kind of accurate trajectory kind of punters, but also one of the things that made Sam Martin, coming from Denver to Buffalo, was his hang time. And that was one of the biggest issues with Punt God. And by the way, is a huge issue for Ariza right now in Kansas City. It was last year. He's got a giant leg. He can't seemingly get the ball up in the air. So I think they want somebody who's obviously capable of coming in here and holding the ball, adequately. And if you're, I appreciate that you brought, the resident holder of the media.
I was just going to say that it's like destiny.
I really appreciate that you started it by saying that Sam Martin is widely known as one of the best holders in the league. I'd like to know if there's a rankings or a list somewhere. But if Joe B is the resident punt, specialist and enthusiast, I guess I'm the resident holding enthusiast, and I'll take that honor.
Yeah, you've got a great track record holding footballs for many years.
Yeah, it's
but
close.
Why don't we dive in to some more important and I think interesting topics? First of all,
Sure.
DK Metcalf, obviously Bills fans chomping at the bit. Myself also looking for Brandon Beane and the Bills to do whatever they can to get this, I think, 27-year-old wide receiver in here and find a way to fit him both with a trade and then a future contract. And SpotTrack came out with a nice article, previous examples from the last 10 years of 27 or 28-year-old wide receivers traded and what the teams acquired contract-wise. Only twice was the wide receiver acquired with just 1 year remaining on the deal, like Metcalf, who has $18 million on his deal for this season. But in both situations, wide receivers were looking for new deals with their new teams and did get them at a pretty exorbitant rate. So Bills have some cap considerations to take into account here. And also, they don't like to kick the can down the road in terms of the draft. They like to stand pat with their draft pick. So what's your view on this situation, and how likely do you think it is that Brandon Beane is truly aggressively pursuing this situation?
Yeah, I saw Ben Volin tweet that a team to watch the Buffalo Bills. I'll for one am excited that the Bills are now being, tied to a lot of great players at wide receiver, Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, for how little or how long that lasted, that little cup of tea. Rather than running backs, every aging running back used to just get, if they're old and they were running back, they were getting tied to the Bills. So it's nice that there's been a little bit of a shift there. But, in terms of DK Metcalf, there's a lot of things to like about a potential fit, right? I think he is exactly the type of player that they've been looking for on offense, a true boundary X-receiver, somebody that can play on the numbers, physical, can block, and frankly, can be a vertical threat. And I think that's really what Sean McDermott's talked about. It's what Brandon Beane's talked about, is finding that true vertical element within the offense. And this sort of trade, I think perfectly encapsulates that exact need. The question is, what does that trade look like? And initial reports are that Seattle's looking for a first-round pick. That's not going to happen. Not with a year remaining left on his contract. They don't have a ton of leverage in the situation. He is asked for a trade. A trade is likely going to happen. And it behooves them to get this trade done before the draft. And frankly, over the next 2 weeks, I think it behooves them to get this trade done for a couple of reasons. A, they kind of want to know what draft pick they're going to get in return. and then kind of figure out where that falls in the draft and kind of prepare for that. So I think more than likely the Bills have what it takes to get a trade done. I think I've seen some initial reports for the first team that really was tied to DK Metcalf, which was the Green Bay Packers. I also think another really good fit, young quarterback, offense with a lot of young receivers, two of which need to get re-signed, and Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs. So it'll be interesting to see if they can get that swing and get that done, because I saw a Dontarius Wicks and like a third and a fifth or something. And I think you could probably get away. The Bills do not have a third-round pick, so that's important to note in any negotiation or any conversations you and your friends are having about a potential trade with the Seattle Seahawks. The Bills do not own a third-round pick this year. Now, obviously, next year comes into play if that's something that Seattle's willing to talk through. But I think a second-round pick and like a Keon Coleman and then a fourth or a fifth coming back could make a lot of sense for the Bills. And obviously these types of trades where you're making the trade, trading assets, and then having to immediately extend that player makes it tricky. Right now, if the Bills wanted to make the trade, they do not have the cap space to make that move. So last year, I was sitting in an airport when all of the moves went down. Brandon Beane cutting Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, and Micah Hyde retiring, and Mitch Morris, and all those moves, right? They happened exactly 12 months ago today. And I get the sense that, we saw the first move in Sam Martin. I'm sort of waiting for the Josh Allen extension or retweak of that contract. And then obviously, what's going to happen with Von Miller. So I think right now the Bills are not necessarily in a negotiation position, because if it is today, it's, hey, Green Bay's got this offer for us. What do you got? The Bills would have to do quite a bit of work to be able to actually complete a trade with Seattle. So listen, the fit's there. I think they can fit him under their cap. And if the move were, and I could easily sell myself on this, which is if the move is to trade for DK, sign him at 28, 27 million, maybe, I know he's talking about a $30 million number. I don't think he gets there. I think if that's the move, well, then you still have another second-round pick if you are going to end up moving a second-round pick in this trade, a first-round pick, and a bunch of, I think, still room to make some moves defensively in free agency, depending on how you structure that contract. It could be a great move, and then you go young, and you do what kind of the Los Angeles Rams did, right? Which is, they draft 2 early defensive linemen, 3 in the last 2 years in the draft. All 3 are really darn good players. So I think you could make a case that if you want to make one big move on offense and then spend the rest of your assets on defense, that's a scenario I could get down with that.
Yeah, you mentioned no third-round pick, and you also mentioned the 2 second-round picks that the Bills have, and one of them coming at near pick 60. That is as close to a third-round pick as you're going to get. And if the Seahawks are looking for a first and third-round pick, why not split the difference with a second, maybe throw in a player, as you and some others have mentioned. So I think you got to do what you have to do here. And just some examples in previous circumstances, as I mentioned from Spot Track, the Browns acquiring Odell Beckham from the Giants. They acquired 5 years, $74 million on that deal. The Bills acquiring Stephon Diggs, 4 years, $57.1 million. The Cardinals, DeAndre Hopkins, 3 years, $40 million. The Texans acquiring Brandon Cooks, 3 years, $35 million. And then the 2 examples of the 1 year remaining on the contract, Tyreek Hill had 1 year, $18 million remaining. And then he agreed to a 4-year, $120 million extension as part of the trade. And then Calvin Ridley, acquired by the Jaguars from the Falcons. He had 1 year, $11.1 remaining, and subsequently agreed to a 4-year, $92 million free agent contract with the Titans that offseason. So I think we're going to see DK Metcalf command something along those lines in terms of a big contract coming his way after the trade is made. So certainly you're going to have to keep that into consideration if you make any move for DK Metcalf. But this is a player that is going to turn around this offense. James Cook is the second most talented playmaker on this offense. And beyond him, I like what Khalil Shakir provides, but I don't really look at him as the playmaking type, the matchup beating type. He's more of a possession run after the catch guy. So I think bringing in another guy that you can look to in a big situation, I think that hurt them against the Chiefs, and it hurts them against some of these top tier defenses that can rush the passer and cover on the back end. But why don't we move into Joey Bosa, another a player that is available now, not even potentially available, released by the Chargers. A steep injury history here, a long injury history, 29 years old. He's missed 30 games due to injury since the 2016 season. That courtesy of Banged Up Bills. He rounded up that information. 3 games missed last season, finished with 5 sacks in 14 games for the Chargers. He's about 3 years removed from a 10-sack season, and Bosa, once touted as one of the elite pass rushers in the league. I think injuries have slowly whittled away his production over the years, but maybe you get him at a low cost. He's certainly not going to command the type of money that you might have to pay Myles Garrett in a potential trade. So if you're worried about the cap and you can't fit Myles Garrett or something like that under the cap, maybe Bosa is a secondary option here at 29 years old.
I think he's earmarked for San Francisco. I think he wants to go play with his brother. Yeah. And, listen, I think that's the kind of player you'd really look to shy away from if you're the Bills. I think initially, the name itself holds it's got some name power, right? It's got some holding power. But I think something like 6.5, 4.5, and 2.5 over the last 3 years, something along those lines, right? Like, it's not been the Joey Bosa that I think a lot of people remember him being. And yeah, the injuries are part of it. And listen, he probably is not going to make the number a lot of people are throwing around. So I think if, the number is a 1 or 2 year deal and, something like $9 to $10 million a year, the Bills would probably look to explore it. But listen, I think if there's a free agent, defensive end that's in LA, to me, it's Khalil Mack, who is still, I think he's on his year 34 season this year.
Correct.
So age, obviously a concern, obviously not a long-term solution, but a 1 year, 2 year Leonard Floyd type of free agent move, a guy that, understands, knows the area. Thought he was going to get drafted here, his draft year. I think that move would make more sense to me because he's coming off a season where he still is very productive. Last 2 years ago, he's coming off a 15-sack season. Now, he also had like 7 sacks in one game, so that helps. But yeah, this is still a very highly productive player. And anybody you bring in, and this is what I would caution people when people are talking about edge, and really any defensive line position here in Buffalo, is it's okay if he's a little older. It's okay if there's a slight injury history. If the Bills to say, hey, we like Joey Bosa, we like the number, we like the fit, and they go out and sign him, people say, well, the injury, he's not coming in here and he's not going to get asked to play 75, 80% of the snaps. And I think that's important to understand and remember when the Bills are out there trying to make some moves at defensive end. And if it's Khalil Mack, can you get 45 to 50% of the snaps with Khalil Mack? And have him playing at a high level? And I think the answer to that question is yes. So just keeping that in mind over the next couple of weeks as the Bills start to fill out the rest of their roster with some free agent veterans, that, this is not a position that someone's coming in here asking to play 70, 80, 90% of the plays like Bosa has in his career or even Khalil Mack has had in his career. So I think that's something to just bear in mind and sort of keep as a good positive spin if you're feeling a little, doubtful about the players that the Bills are going to be linked to here in the next couple of days. And really, talking about Khalil Mack, that's a move I really like. But if they're going to make a swing, a guy like Josh Sweat to me makes a whole lot more sense in free agency. Younger, has that Leonard Floyd type of rangy body, good bend around the edge. So someone like that really could make a lot of sense for me and, potentially for the Bills as well.
Yeah, those are 2 players that Sal and I discussed earlier. I brought up Josh Sweat. Sal believed maybe a little bit too rich for the Bills' blood due to the amount of money he may have made himself this postseason. Mack, you might be able to get in here on a deal that may suit the Bills' situation a little bit better. You're right, age 34 season, 11 years in the league, 17 sacks in 2023, just 6 last year while playing 20% fewer of the snaps than he did a year before. So certainly going to have to scale that back in terms of his percentage of snaps, but that suits what the Bills do. The Bills don't like to run their players out there at a high rate. We saw it with Von Miller this year, and if you're able to get Von Miller back on an incentive-based deal, and then you bring in a Khalil Mack, you have those 2 what's the word, specialty pass rushers off the edge coming in on third down and passing situations. That could be a scary proposition for opposing offenses. And Sweat, like you said, younger, really exploded, 2.5 sacks during the Super Bowl. I think Over the Cap has his projection at about $10 million and Max right around the same, but Sweat being a little bit younger, I think he may warrant a little bit more money. Now, let's move on to James Cook. Saquon Barkley's contract, $20 million a year. I took the stance that may be the death knell in terms of James Cook's future with the Bills and the possibility of him signing a contract extension, whether it be this season or after next season, just due to the fact that that's going to entrench Cook in his stance from my perspective. You have a player that's now making $20 million a year, where I believe before it was $16 million or something like that, the highest number made by a running back in the league. So it obviously is going to come down to if a team will pay him $15 million, whether that is when he hits the open market after this coming season, or if he holds out, if the Bills have to go into trade talks and another team expresses interest in signing him to a deal that pays him $15 million a year. But you saw it differently. You didn't see the correlation between Barkley and Cook's deal. And I get what you're saying. They are two totally different players. Barkley, a 3-down back, one of the league's transcendent backs throughout its history. We saw the unbelievable play, the backward hurdle, and I think that just describes Saquon Barkley to a T. He just does things that other running backs can't do. And Cook, although he led the league in rushing touchdowns this year, he's really developed into more of a complete back. He's gotten rid of some of those concerns dropping the football in the passing game, but still comes off the field too often on third down. So I see where you're coming from, but don't you think that this is going to entrench Cook, as I said before, in his stance? And I guess the question really is, do you think a team outside of the Bills is going to pay him $15 million?
Yeah, I think that's the question that Brandon Beane's going to have to ask himself. And I think that how the New York Giants handled Saquon Barkley is probably going to be a blueprint for how the Bills handle James Cook. I think that, I think last time I was on with you, I talked about hey, which of these extensions could potentially come first? Yeah. I talked about James Cook as being the first extension because I thought they might want to get it out of the way. It's probably the most black and white. It's going to be the shortest term. Maybe that's the move they make first. Obviously, it ends up being Khalil Shakir. Now I think this ends up being something they're going to punt till next offseason. They still have the tag that they could put on him next year if they really want. And the tag will end up being close to $15 million anyway, 16, I think, at the running back position. So I think for me, the question is going to be how this year plays out. Now, if he goes out there and has another 15 touchdowns and adds to his yardage output, and he's a 1,400 yard player, plays more like 60% of the snaps, which I just don't think is going to happen. I think the Bills would like to tell him hey, go see what you're worth, come back. If it's a number we feel, if it's a deal we can match, we'll be willing to match. I think that's going to ultimately be the move for the Bills. And listen, this is the deepest running back draft in some time. So I do think the Bills end up taking a running back. It's going to be interesting, though, because, Ty Johnson is not under contract. I do suspect that's a move that's going to be coming up here in the next couple of days as well. Getting him back in makes just a ton of sense to me. And that's what makes this a little difficult because you have Ray Davis, you have James Cook, you have Ty Johnson, and you're not going to carry 4 running backs on the roster. So if you draft a running back, you might have to make a difficult decision. And is that not bringing Ty Johnson back? Is it bringing somebody else in this draft where you feel like you can get a player that you kind of hang back in the wings, and then next year it's Ray Davis and the rookie this year. So, and I also think there are a lot of similar type running backs to James Cook in this draft. Speed is obviously something that right now, to me, Ray Davis is a nice player, but he does not have that breakaway speed that James Cook has. So long story short, I think what you saw the Giants do with Barkley, I think is probably the same thing the Bills are going to attempt to do with James Cook and say, hey, go see what you're worth. And if you go get 17 million, hey, you've earned it, go get it and go take it. If not, you don't like it could be, I'm saying that is the sort of benchmark or the sort of template, but it could also be very similar to Jordan Poyer. I think it'll play out a lot like Jordan Poyer. I think Jordan Poyer is going to, like he did, he thought he was worth more than the Bills were offering him. He went on the market, realized that, the best he was getting was in Buffalo. I think it could be very similar. I know that, Barkley got paid and, the Henry kind of got paid. I think they restructured and gave him a little bit of a deal last year when they traded for him. But like for me, look at DeAndre Swift. He made big money last offseason, and they're probably going to be one and done with Swift because he's a player. They're talking about, are they going to draft a kid from Boise State now? They're, setting everything up on the offensive line to maybe go get a running back. So, long story short, I felt better about 2-3 weeks ago that this was a move and an extension that could get done. The only thing that changes with this Barkley extension is now I think that allows Cook to dig in a little bit further. So again, I think for me, it's wait till the offseason, see what he's worth, and if you can match it.
And I think this all comes down to fit for James Cook. I think he's a great player no matter where he goes, but this fit in Buffalo with what they're doing with the extra offensive lineman up front, trying to get more physical in the running game, using Reggie Gilliam as a fullback at times, and just that overall physical nature that they're trying to express on their offense with Aaron Cromer as the offensive line coach and Joe Brady making it a more balanced group as well. I think this fit is perfect for James Cook. And I think, like you're saying, if he goes elsewhere, who's to say that he finds a similar fit and finds the same success as he's found in Buffalo? And I think buyer beware when it comes to running backs. I think, like you alluded to on X, Saquon Barkley is the exception. He is not the rule. He is not the player that you're going to get more often than not when you pay.
He's not your benchmark. No, I mean, they're just, exactly. And I can't even think like of and maybe this will be in a couple of years when Bijan Robinson hits the market. Maybe he could look at Saquon and say, I'm the new Saquon. But I also think the same thing about Gibbs in Detroit. That's going to be. I would not put James Cook in the category of either of those two players either.
Yeah, and I don't think many teams will either. But like you said, if they kick that can down the road to next offseason, and that's when they deal with whether or not to re-sign James Cook, perhaps the market changes even more. Running backs getting paid more and more by the day. But I think that's enough Bills talk, unless there's anything else on your mind, Bills-wise. There's been a lot, Nate. You have, 12 unrestricted free agents, something like that.
Yep.
Myles Garrett. Why don't we just touch on Myles Garrett?
Sure.
DK Metcalf, Myles Garrett. If you had your pick of one, taking into account what it's going to cost, the age of the player, the position, the side of the ball, if you had your druthers, which player would you have Brandon Beane trade for?
Just in case Jeremy White's watching, DK Metcalf. I'm enamored with the idea of what he does to unlock even more of Khalil Shakir. And I'm also enamored with the expansion of what a deep passing game can do for this run game as well. So that's the only reason. Listen, I get it. Like if you were to tell me, if you were trying to make a case that Garrett is the better fit because they really need that type of player on the defensive side of the ball, I get it. The Max Crosby extension makes me think that an extension for Myles Garrett could be it will be historical. It will be the highest non-quarterback contract ever. As long as, the Bills have that appetite, then so be it. But I think that it's going to be one of the bigger contracts the league has ever seen. It might just be a little too rich for my blood and for the Bills' blood, but I don't think you could. I'm sold on either. You can convince me either is the right decision. And for me, I look at it and I say, which of these guys is going to give you the extra play or two that you needed against the Chiefs and in these games? It's hard to convince me that DK might not have a bigger impact than Myles Garrett will. But at the end of the day, it'll be interesting to see what ultimately ends up being the decision. And can they get either guy? Because they might leave this offseason getting neither, especially with Howie Roseman kind of circling the water around Myles Garrett as well.
You mentioned Howie Roseman. I think I saved. I hope I did. Yeah. Everyone talks about how The Bills have no money. This team has no money. Eagles contract extensions, annual new money average. Jalen Hurts, $51 million. Saquon, $20 million. A.J. Brown, $32 million. Devontae Smith, $25 million. Dallas Goedert, $14 million. Jordan Mailata, $22 million. That's a left tackle. Left guard, Landon Dickerson, $21 million. Right tackle, Lane Johnson, $20 million. Linebacker, Zach Bond, who was just paid $17 million. So there's ways to get these players under contract and fit them in. Howie Roseman has figured out new ways to do it seemingly year after year.
It's to me, it's less about Howie Roseman. It's more about Jeffrey Lurie. He spends
so
more
much
cash.
liquidity.
That's right. It's cash. And it's not to tell you that I don't think, Terry can do the same. He probably has quite a bit of appetite to spend, knowing how close this team is, and how much, they're really focused on, getting more PSLs. I think the thing with them is they defer more money than anybody in the NFL. And that is fine as long as all of those players are performing, and all of the young players on deferred money are performing at a high level. They will have a New Orleans like reckoning in the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. Until then, they're firmly in a Super Bowl window, and they're spending like it. But my point about PSLs, I think the report came out that 11,000 PSLs have been sold. That's way, way under. I talked to a lot of people. My dad was one of these people. He's been a season ticket holder for 20 years, lower bowl, 30-yard line, Bills sideline, 26 rows up. And it's just, he's had 2 tickets, so he could bring a friend, bring his girl, whatever, right? Like he's not going out there and buying 2 tickets with, $10,000 PSL prices, plus double the price of those tickets. So it would not shock me at all if this is a big offseason for the Bills in terms of splash moves, because I think there is an appetite to generate a little bit more excitement around the team while they're still trying to sell these PSLs. I said it from the beginning. It was hot and heavy early because they were able to sell those club level seats, those executive level seats very quickly. It was always going to slow and bottleneck once it was time for, regular everyday people to buy these seats. They are well behind. So don't be surprised if there's a move in here that's meant to accelerate excitement a little bit. That would not surprise me at all.
Yeah, one of my good friends, Dan Dickens, he's been a season ticket holder, I believe, 30 years now, and he's already made the decision that he will not, him and his wife, Kate, will not resume or retain their 2 season tickets in the new stadium. They're going to elect to go on more road trips, spend more time with family during the home games, and perhaps pick and choose some home games. Because there's tickets always available on Ticket Exchange and this, that, or the other thing. So I think that's a good point, and maybe that puts Brandon Beane in a position to go out there and really go balls out more than ever and just burn it all down and really go forget them picks, as I said on Twitter, card carrying member of the Forget Them Picks club.
Card carrying number, that's right. Members only.
Yes. Forget them picks this year. Go after the big ticket items, and if it's my money, I go after Myles Garrett just because he's a generational player. DK Metcalf, a phenomenal receiver, but Myles Garrett, and not only his production on the field, listening to him talk at the microphone, I think what he could bring to this defense would be just incredible. And my last question to you, Nate, and you don't have to expand too far. I know that this is a topic you're passionate on, so it might be tough for you to do so, but quick Buffalo restaurant, Mount Rushmore, those that are still open, because I know the scene, unfortunately, has seen a lot of closures lately, a lot of renowned restaurants unable to move, or just deciding not to move forward.
All right. Buffalo restaurant, Mount Rushmore. I got to go Oliver's on there. I'm going to go Little Club on there. I've got to bring in one of my favorite wing spots. And frankly, actually, I'm going to end it with 2 great wing spots as my Mount Rushmore. First one, 9/11. I think the best buffalo wing. It's the standard in Western New York. And then I also really think that it's hard to find a liverwurst sandwich in Western New York. So Adolph's First Ward gets to be on my Mount Rushmore with a Honorable mention of Beltline Brewing, because I also think it's one of the most underrated food spots in Western New York, whether it's burgers, chicken sandwiches, wings. Chef George is chefing it up over there. So, yeah, that's if you're a fine dining person, Oliver's Little Club are just about as good as it gets in Western New York.
My Mount Rushmore, and I respect your Mount Rushmore. I think you're more well-versed in the Buffalo restaurant scene than I am. I've been dipping my toe a little bit more and more over these years covering the Bills, but my Mount Rushmore, give me Left Bank any day of the week, twice on Sunday. I don't even know if they're open on Sunday, but also Mother's, that's kind of a sentimental favorite, old school favorite as well. 9/11 favorite wing spot. And then this probably doesn't count because not in Buffalo, but I'm going to give you one in the suburbs of the surrounding area. Give me more Lewski's.
More Lewski's. Yes, wow.
The Polish, Italian, everything homemade on the menu. That may be my favorite of the bunch, that place.
Interesting.
It's incredible. And being a Polish boy myself, I can't.
Brasky, really? That's Polish?
Oh, yeah. It used to be Berzakowski before we came over on the boat. So
before Bill Brasky changed everything for you and the family. Yeah. Uncle Bill is what I've heard you refer him as. So
right, yep. Toenail on his penis, Bill Brasky. Anything you want to plug, Nate? Anything you got coming up? I know it's kind of off-season mode for you. You fill in on WGR every once in a while. Always pleased when I hear your voice there.
I will be in for the last 2 weeks of the month on the morning show, filling in for Jeremy the second to last week, and then Joe in the last week of the month. So I'll be on quite a bit towards the end of this month, and then by the time that's over with, golf season.
Golf, baby. Just make sure we're keeping the back in shape.
Oh, don't you worry. I'm investing a lot into the back. Alex.
We can't have a couple weeks off or whatever like we did last year, the year before.
That's correct.
But all right, Nate, thank you for joining me. I'm going to let you get out of here. Then we're going to hear from our sponsor at Forefathers Organic. So thanks a lot. Sorry to cut Nate off there. We'd like to thank our friends, Forefathers Organics in Dansville, and we'll close it out on the other side.
Unlock the power of nature with Forefathers Organics, your premium CBD store. We offer the highest quality CBD and hemp products to liberate your mind, body, and soul, helping you live happy and free. Our mission is driven by excellence and transparency, using cutting-edge scientific methods to combat stress and target issues at their source. From potent ingestible CBD to soothing topicals, all our products are USDA certified organic. Discover all natural wellness from farm to table. Visit forefathersorganics.com for more information.
All right, so the news keeps coming hot and heavy. Bengals have taken the rare step of granting All-Pro defensive end Trey Hendrickson permission to seek a trade. Quote, "It's been an honor and privilege to represent Cincinnati over the last 4 years," said Hendrickson, the NFL's sack leader this last year. "I love this city and organization. I appreciate the privilege of now being allowed to explore my options." That courtesy of Adam Schefter. And let's look at Trey Hendrickson's contract details here. Coming up on the last year of his deal in 2025, base salary of $15.8 million. His cap number will be $18.6 million. So right around the number that DK Metcalf would warrant if you were to trade for him. This is a player that, like I said, led the league in sacks this past season. He's been phenomenal for Cincinnati for the past number of years. That defense has kind of been up and down, a little bit inconsistent, but Trey Hendrickson has been one of the constants for that team, and getting his services here in Buffalo, that would make a Myles Garrett level impact. Let's see. I don't have my USB keyboard with me today. Let's look at Hendrickson. The last few years for Cincinnati, 17.5 sacks each of the last 2 years, 8 in 2022, 14 in 2021, and then 13.5 in 2020 for the Saints. He's been a Pro Bowler each of the last 4 years, an All-Pro first-teamer this year. Give me some Trey Hendrickson, baby. I can't get enough of these guys. I want the Bills to sign all these players. Hendrickson now the latest on the list. I think, like Nate and I talked about before he parted ways, you have to find a way to bring in a generational player, a difference maker, a playmaker on either side of the ball. The Bills do not have enough of them. This is a solid roster. There's not many holes on this roster, but there's also not many generational players such as a Josh Allen or perhaps a James Cook is trending toward at the running back position. I don't think I'd classify him quite at that level at this point. Trey Hendrickson, the league sack leader this past year. Myles Garrett, a player year in and year out who dominates opposing offensive lines. DK Metcalf, a massive wide receiver who gets the better of matchups on the outside. Those three players, my top targets for Brandon Beane in the trade market this offseason. I think that's a good place to start. And then if you're unable to land any of those three, unfortunately, then you move on to some of the lesser priced players on the market. But you have to go after one of these big fish. Nate talked about it with the PSLs a little bit lower than perhaps the team expected at this point of the offseason. Only 1 year to go left in the Ralph, as it's affectionately known. And if you're the Bills, you want to kick off that 2026 season with a bang. And to put yourself in position to do so, you're bringing a player like Myles Garrett, Trey Hendrickson, or DK Metcalf. Find a way by any means necessary. Get rid of the picks. Kick the can down the road in terms of the salary cap. The time is now. Go out and find a way to win a Super Bowl. And the time is now for us to part ways here on the podcast. Thank you for joining me right here, right now. We'll see you next time.